The rain did not fall gently. It crashed down in sheets, cold and unforgiving, soaking the marble steps of the luxury hotel where fairy tales were supposed to begin. The white lights along the entrance reflected off the wet ground, blurring into broken halos that hurt GH's eyes if she stared too long. She stood barefoot at the top step, her wedding heels discarded somewhere behind her, her once pristine ivory gown clinging heavily to her skin. Each drop of rain felt like an accusation. Her phone was silent, not even a missed call. GH's fingers tightened around it anyway, as if gripping harder might summon the man who was supposed to be her husband, the man who had promised, just that morning, to meet her at the altar with a smile. Inside the hotel ballroom, chairs were still neatly arranged. White roses still lined the aisle. Guests had left quietly, offering awkward apologies, avoiding her eyes. The violinist had packed up without being told. And the groom? Gone. GR swallowed hard, her throat burning. She had not cried yet. Crying felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that this moment, this day she had carried in her heart for years, was truly over. She remembered how carefully she had chosen this dress, how her hands had shaken as her mother buttoned it up, whispering, "You look so happy." Happy. A bitter smile tugged at GH's lips. The rain soaked through the thin layers of satin, the cold creeping into her bones. She hugged herself, shoulders trembling now, not from the cold but from the effort it took to keep standing. That was when she felt it, a warmth that did not belong to the night. Small arms wrapped tightly around her waist. GI gasped, her breath hitching as her body reacted on instinct. She looked down, heart racing. A little girl stood pressed against her, her cheek resting against the wet fabric of GH's dress as if it were the safest place in the world. The child's hair was neatly braided, though loose strands clung to her damp forehead. She smelled faintly of soap and rain. GR froze. The girl tightened her hug, tiny fingers clutching the dress with surprising strength. Then she whispered, her voice soft but steady, "Please, be my mom." The world seemed to tilt. GR dropped to her knees without thinking, her dress pooling around her as the rain continued to fall. She stared at the child, her chest tightening so painfully she thought she might stop breathing. "What?" GR whispered. "Sweetheart, I think you're mistaken." The girl pulled back just enough to look at her. Her eyes were large, dark, and heartbreakingly serious. "You're sad," the child said. "Mommy was sad like this before she went away." GAH's hand lifted on its own, brushing a raindrop from the girl's cheek. "Went away." The girl nodded. "Daddy says she's in heaven, but I think she misses us." Something cracked inside GR. Before she could respond, a shadow fell across them. GR felt it before she saw him. The shift in the air, the quiet authority of someone who did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. "I'm sorry." The voice was deep, calm, and controlled. GR looked up. He stood a few steps away, untouched by the rain beneath the hotel canopy. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black so perfectly tailored it looked like the fabric had been made for him alone. His face was sharp, composed, but his eyes, dark and watchful, were locked on the child with unmistakable concern. "My daughter has a habit of speaking her heart," he continued, "even to strangers." The girl looked over her shoulder. "Appa, she smells like flowers. Mommy like flowers." The man's jaw tightened, just for a moment. GR rose slowly to her feet, suddenly acutely aware of herself, her ruined makeup, her soaked dress, her humiliation laid bare. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong," the man said. His gaze flicked briefly to her gown, then to the empty hotel behind her. Understanding settled in his eyes, heavy and quiet. "My name is Kang Minute, he said. "This is Seo-Yun." "Han Jia," she replied automatically, bowing her head slightly. Seo-Yun smiled, bright and unguarded. "See, I told you she was nice." Minute exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "Jia," he repeated, tasting the name. "You look cold." The words were simple, but the way he said them, without pity, without judgment, made GH's chest ache. "There's a car waiting," he said after a pause, "and a warm place nearby. You're welcome to come with us, just until the rain stops." GR hesitated. Everything in her life had just collapsed. Logic told her to refuse, to retreat into solitude and pride. Seo-yoon slipped her small hand into Jih's. "Please," she said softly. Ji-ah looked down at the child, then back at the man whose eyes now held something dangerously close to hope. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Min-jae opened the car door himself, and without knowing it, Ji-ah stepped into a world she had never imagined, one that would test her courage, her heart, and her definition of love itself. She did not know yet that the man offering her shelter ruled a city from the shadows, or that the little girl holding her hand would soon change all their lives. The car moved silently through the city, its dark windows shielding them from a world Ji-ah no longer felt part of. Rain streaked across the glass like hurried fingers, distorting streetlights into trembling lines of gold. Seo-yoon sat close to her, small hand still curled around Jih's fingers as if afraid she might disappear if she let go. The warmth of that grip felt unreal, too intimate for a stranger, yet impossible to reject. Ji-ah stared straight ahead, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She hardly recognized the woman looking back. Her hair was damp and loose, her eyes red-rimmed, her wedding dress wrinkled and stained at the hem. She looked like someone who had stepped out of a story halfway through and been forgotten there. "Are you uncomfortable?" Kang Min-jae asked from the other side of the car. His voice was calm, but his eyes flicked toward her in the reflection, attentive without being invasive. "I'm fine," Ji-ah replied softly. "Just tired." Seo-yoon leaned her head against Jih's arm. "Daddy's house is very big," she announced. "But it's quiet. Too quiet." Min-jae's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ji-ah glanced at him then, really looked. He sat perfectly still, one hand resting loosely on his knee, the other near Seo-yoon as if always prepared to reach for her. There was power in the way he held himself, an effortless authority that did not need to announce itself. And yet, there was something else. Loneliness, carefully hidden. The car climbed higher, leaving the crowded streets behind. Trees replaced neon signs. Security gates opened without a sound. When the car finally stopped, Jih's breath caught. The house rose before them, modern, expansive, all clean lines and glass walls. It overlooked the city like a watchful guardian, lights glowing warmly against the darkness. "This is home," Min-jae said. Inside, warmth wrapped around Ji immediately. The scent of polished wood and something faintly floral lingered in the air. Everything was immaculate, almost museum-like, yet not cold. It felt protected. Seo-yoon kicked off her shoes and immediately tugged Ji forward. "Come, you can sit where Mummy used to sit." The words landed softly, but they landed. Min-jae froze for a fraction of a second before recovering. "Seo-yoon," he said gently. "It's okay," Ji said before she could stop herself. She followed the child into the living room, her wet dress whispering against the floor. The couch was wide and inviting. Seo-yoon climbed up and patted the space beside her. Ji sat, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Min-jae returned moments later with a towel and held it out to her. "You'll catch a cold." "Thank you," she murmured, taking it. Their fingers brushed, just briefly, but Ji felt the contact like a spark. Dinner was simple but comforting. Seo-yoon talked endlessly, her voice filling the quiet spaces of the house with life. Ji found herself responding naturally, smiling, asking questions. Min-jae mostly listened. He watched the way Ji leaned closer when Seo-yoon spoke softly, the way she laughed without realizing it, the way she never once looked uncomfortable around his daughter. Later, as Seo-yoon grew sleepy, Ji helped her brush her teeth and tuck her into bed. The child clung to her hand even as her eyes fluttered shut. "Don't go," Seo-yoon whispered. "I'm right here," Ji replied, surprised to find she meant it. When Ji stepped back into the hallway, Min-jae was waiting. "She likes you," he said quietly. Ji nodded. "She misses her mother." "So do I," he admitted. The honesty in his voice startled her. "I didn't plan for you to stay," Min-jae continued. "But Seo-yoon hasn't slept that peacefully since her mother passed." Ji hesitated. "I don't want to overstep." "You're not," he said immediately. Then, after a pause, "But you should know something." She looked at him. "My life is complicated." Something in his tone made her straighten. Complicated how? He held her gaze steadily. I'm not a businessman. Not in the way people think. The silence stretched. You don't have to tell me, Jia said carefully. I do, he replied. If you're going to stay. Stay. The word echoed in her chest. I lead an organization, Minute J said. One that exists in the shadows. There are people who fear me. Others who would gladly use anyone close to me to hurt me. Jia felt a chill, not of fear, but of understanding. You're dangerous, she said quietly. Yes, he replied without pride. And because of that, anyone under my roof must be protected. Jia took a slow breath. She had already lost everything that day. Somehow, the danger did not scare her as much as it should have. I'm not asking for protection, she said. Minute J stepped closer, his voice dropping. You won't have a choice. Their eyes locked. In that moment, Jia realized something unsettling. Being near him felt frightening. Yes, but also strangely safe. Days passed. What began as a temporary stay quietly transformed into routine. Jia cooked breakfast with Seo-yoon, walked her to school under the watchful eyes of men she pretended not to notice, filled the house with gentle sounds. Minute J came and went, his schedule unpredictable. Sometimes he returned late, carrying the scent of rain and smoke, his expression unreadable. One evening, Jia noticed blood on his cuff. You're hurt, she said. It's nothing, he replied. She didn't argue. She simply fetched a cloth and cleaned the cut with careful hands. Minute J watched her, silent, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Why are you still here? He asked suddenly. Jia paused. Because Seo-yoon needs me. And you, he pressed. She met his gaze. Because I needed somewhere not empty. The truth hung between them. The threat came sooner than expected. Jia noticed it first, the car parked too often across the street. The way Seo-yoon's school pickup route subtly changed, the tension in Minute J's body tightening like a coiled wire. One night, he stood before her, his voice grave. There are people watching the house. Jih's heart pounded. Then I should leave. No, Minute J said firmly. That would put you in more danger. She searched his face. Why does this feel like a mistake? Because kindness is dangerous, he replied. Especially to men like me. Their eyes held. Neither of them stepped back. Outside, unseen, someone lifted a phone and took a picture. Jia standing beside Kang Minute J. Smiling. She did not know yet that this single image would make her a target, or that loving his daughter had already sealed her fate. Morning light filtered softly through the tall windows, pale gold and quiet. Jia woke before the house did. A habit formed during weeks that had begun to feel like a different lifetime. For a moment, just one fragile moment, she forgot the dress, the rain, the abandonment. Then she remembered. She lay still, listening to the steady hum of the house. Somewhere below, a door closed softly. Footsteps, measured, unhurried. Minute J was already awake. Jia dressed quietly and moved into the kitchen. The counters were pristine, the space filled with the scent of coffee she hadn't brewed yet. She began preparing breakfast out of instinct, moving carefully, aware of the quiet power the house carried. Good morning. She turned. Minute J stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, hair still slightly damp from a shower. Without his coat, without the armor of his public self, he looked human, tired, young. Good morning, she replied. He watched her crack eggs into a bowl, the way she focused as if this small task anchored her to the present. You don't have to do that, he said. I want to, she replied simply. Seo-yoon appeared moments later, hair tousled, eyes sleepy. She ran straight to Jia, wrapping her arms around her waist with complete certainty. Mon. The word fell into the room, like a held breath finally released. Jia froze. Minute J did too. Seo-yoon looked up, confused by the sudden stillness. What? Jia swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as she rested them on the child's shoulders. Sweetheart, are you sure? Seo-yoon nodded, serious. You take care of me. You stay. You don't leave. Something inside Jia gave way. She glanced at Minute J, unsure. her eyes silently asking permission she didn't know she needed. Minute J's voice was quiet. Seo-yun, you should only say that if you truly feel it. I do, the child said firmly. Ji-ah knelt, pulling Seo-yun into a gentle embrace. Then, you can call my mom, she whispered. Minute J turned away. Later that day, Ji-ah stood at the gate watching Seo-yun's school car dissipate. A strange, fierce protectiveness filled her chest. She felt seen, not as a bride left behind, but as someone chosen. The illusion shattered that afternoon. She was in the garden when a man stepped too close. He wore an ordinary suit, his expression polite, but his eyes were wrong. Too sharp, too interested. You must be the new one, he said lightly. G.H.'s heart skipped. I'm sorry. The woman in the house, he continued. You look important. Before she could respond, two of Minute J's men appeared, positioning themselves subtly between her and the stranger. The man smiled. Tell Kang Minute J his past always catches up. He walked away. That night, Minute J's anger was a living thing. They approached you, he demanded, voice low. Yes, G.R. replied steadily. I wasn't afraid. He closed his eyes briefly. You should have been. The house changed after that. Security doubled. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Seo-yun was kept closer, watched constantly. Ji-ah confronted Minute J in his study, her voice firm. If I'm in danger, I deserve to know why. He met her gaze. Because they think you matter. Her chest tightened. Do I? Yes, he said immediately. Then, softer. Too much. That night, the attack came. Ji-ah was alone in the kitchen when the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the room. Her heart pounded as footsteps echoed behind her. A hand grabbed her arm. She fought. She remembered everything Minute J had taught her. Where to strike, how to scream, how to run. She made it to the door before the blow came. The world went black. She woke to the sound of gunfire. Shouts. Glass shattering. The house shook with violence. Minute J burst into the room where she was held. Blood on his knuckles. Eyes wild with something she had never seen before. Ji-ah, he breathed. She reached for him, pain exploding through her body. Seo-yun. She's safe, he said fiercely. Because of you. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if letting go would destroy him. You should never have been touched, he said hoarsely. This ends tonight. Outside, sirens wailed. And somewhere in the shadows, a war had begun. Ji-ah woke to the smell of antiseptic and the low murmur of voices beyond the door. Her head throbbed dully, pain blooming behind her eyes as awareness returned in slow fragments. Darkness, hands grabbing her, the sharp crack of something striking her temple. She tried to move and hissed softly when a wave of soreness rippled through her shoulder. Don't, a voice said immediately. Minute J sat beside the bed. Not standing guard, not pacing, sitting, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, see the faint bruising along his knuckles, the dark shadow under his eyes. He hadn't changed his clothes. There was dried blood at his cuff that was not hairs. You awake, he said, quietly. Relief slipped through his control before he could stop it. Ji-ah swallowed. Seo-yun. She's asleep, he answered. In my room. She wouldn't let anyone else stay with her. Ji-ah closed her eyes, breathing through the ache in her chest. They came because of me. They came because of me, he corrected. You were simply the opening they thought I'd left unguarded. She opened her eyes again, fixing him with a steady look. Then stop treating me like a mistake. His jaw tightened. I won't hide, she continued. I won't be locked away in safe rooms while your world burns around me. Minute J stood abruptly, turning his back as if her words physically struck him. You don't understand what you're standing in. I understand fear, she said. I understand being powerless. And I understand choosing to stay anyway. He faced her then, his control visibly fraying. If you get hurt again. I already was, she said softly. And I'm still here. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. You saved Seo-yun, he said finally. You fought back long enough for my men to reach you. I did what any mother would, she replied. The word lingered. Minute J looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a guest, not as a risk, but as a presence rooted deeply in his life. "You are not replaceable," he said quietly. "Do you understand that?" Her breath caught. "Neither are you." From that night on, something shifted. Gi was no longer kept at the edges of Minute J's world. She wasn't told everything, but she was no longer lied to. She learned the rhythms of his danger, the nights when his silence meant violence narrowly avoided, the mornings when relief came disguised as exhaustion. And in between, life continued. Seo-yoon laughed again, freely, without checking the adults' faces first. She brought drawings home from school with 3 figures now. Always 3. One evening, after Seo-yoon had fallen asleep between them during a movie, Ji-ah realized a hand was resting against Minute J's. Neither of them moved. The house was quiet, the city lights glowing beyond the glass like distant stars. "You could still leave," he said quietly. "I would help you start over. Somewhere safe." Ji-ah turned to him. "Would you be safe?" He didn't answer. "That's your answer," she said gently. He looked at her then, really looked, at the steadiness in her gaze, the softness that did not waver even now. "I have destroyed everything I ever loved," he said. "That is why I survive." Ji-ah reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. He flinched, not away, but inward. "You're surviving wrong," she said. "You don't survive by staying untouched. You survive by choosing what's worth the risk." His breath hitched. This time, when their eyes met, there was no pretense left. He leaned closer, not to kiss her, not yet, but close enough that the space between them felt charged, alive. "If I cross this line," he said hoarsely, "there's no going back." G.A.H's voice was barely a whisper. "Then don't go back." Footsteps echoed suddenly in the hallway. The moment broke, but it didn't vanish. The warning came the next day. Minute J returned home early, his face carved from stone. He gathered his inner circle in the study. Ji-ah stood at the doorway, listening. "They're uniting," one of the men said. 3 factions. They want leverage. "And they already tried," Minute J replied coldly. Ji-ah stepped forward. "Then stop letting them think I'm leverage." Every head turned. Minute J's eyes darkened. "Absolutely not." "Then let me be visible," she said. "Let them see that I'm not afraid. That hurting me won't break you." "That is exactly what it would do," he said. She met his fury without flinching. "Then that's why it will work." The room fell silent. Minute J stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "You are reckless," he said. "And you are tired," she replied. That night, as Minute J prepared to confront the threat head-on, he stopped outside G.A.H's door. "If I don't come back." She cut him off. "You will." He hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against hers. Not a kiss. Something more intimate. "For the first time," he whispered, "I am afraid of dying." Ji-ah closed her eyes. "Good. That means you have something to live for." He left, and Ji-ah stood in the doorway long after, knowing with terrifying certainty that the next time danger came, it would not be a warning. It would be a war. The first message came without violence. That was how Ji-ah knew it was meant to terrify her. She found it on the kitchen counter just after breakfast, a single white envelope placed neatly beside the fruit bowl. No name, no stamp, no sign of how it had entered the house. Her hands went cold. Inside was a photograph. It showed her walking Seo-yoon home from school, her hand wrapped protectively around the child's small shoulders. The image was close enough to capture the concern on G.H.'s face as she looked down at her, close enough to show the gentle curve of Seo-yoon's smile. On the back, written in clean, deliberate handwriting, were 4 words. "Choose who bleeds first." Ji-ah didn't scream. She sat down slowly, pressing her palm flat against the counter to steady herself. Her heart thundered, but her mind, sharpened by fear and love, moved with terrifying clarity. They weren't asking for money. They weren't asking for territory. They were testing Kang Minute J. She burned the photograph in the sink before Seo-yoon could see it. When Minute J came home, she handed him the ashes. His reaction was immediate and absolute. The house went into lockdown. Men flooded the grounds. Phones rang. Orders were given in a voice so cold it could have frozen steel. But when Minute J finally stood before Jia, alone, his composure fractured. They crossed a line, he said quietly. When it was over, bodies lay still, and the river carried the echoes away. Minute J stood among the wreckage, breathing hard. It's done, he said. Jia reached for his hand. Come home. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded. But danger does not always announce itself loudly. The shot came from behind. Jia screamed as Minute J staggered, blood blooming across his side. He fell to one knee, teeth clenched, refusing to go down. She ran to him, pulling him into her arms as his men closed in, ending the last threat for good. Minute J's vision blurred. Stay, Jia whispered. You promised. His hand tightened weakly around hers. I'm still here. The sirens came too late. At the hospital, Seo-yoon sat silently, clutching GH's sleeve with white-knuckled intensity. Appa, she whispered. Is fighting, Jia said softly. Just like you taught him. Hours passed. Then the doctor emerged. He'll live, the doctor said. But the recovery will be long. Jia exhaled, tears finally falling. When Minute J woke, Jia was there. You didn't leave, he murmured. Never, she said. He looked at her, voice rough. I don't want to rule shadows anymore. Then don't, she replied. Rule your life. He closed his eyes, surrendering at last, not to death, but to love. Outside the room, Seo-yoon pressed her drawing against the glass. 3 figures, holding hands. Minute J's recovery was slow. The doctors warned him from the beginning. His body would heal faster than his instincts. The habits of violence, the reflex to command and control, would not disappear simply because he wished them gone. Jia learned the rhythm of his healing the way she had learned the rhythm of Seo-yoon's breathing at night. Some days were quiet, peaceful, almost deceptively normal. Seo-yoon did her homework at the kitchen table. Jia cooked. Minute J sat nearby, watching instead of ruling, listening instead of planning. Other days were harder. Men came to the house, carefully, respectfully, each carrying news of territories dissolving, alliances fracturing, power shifting now that Kang Minute J was no longer feared in the same way. You're creating a vacuum, one of them warned. Minute J replied evenly, I'm closing a door. After they left, Jia found him standing alone in the study, staring out at the city. They won't let you leave quietly, she said. I know, he replied. They never forgive men who walk away. She stepped beside him. Then let them learn something new. He turned to her. You're not afraid anymore. I am, she admitted. But fear doesn't get to decide for me. The true test came not with guns, but with choice. One afternoon, Jia was approached at Seo-yoon's school. A woman stepped out of a black car, elegant and composed, her eyes sharp with intelligence. I was hoping we could talk, the woman said. About Kang Minute J. Jia didn't flinch. You already are. The woman smiled faintly. I represent people who still need him. His leadership. His reputation. His done, Jia said calmly. You don't get to decide that, the woman replied. Jia met her gaze. Actually, I do. That night, Jia told Minute J everything. He listened in silence, then laughed softly, without humor. They came to you because they know I won't listen to them. Then listen to me, Jia said. If you go back, you lose us. Seo-yoon stood in the doorway, unnoticed, her small voice cutting through the tension. I don't want Appa to be scary anymore. Minute J's breath caught. He knelt in front of his daughter, resting his forehead against hers. I won't be, he promised. Not ever again. Jia watched the moment quietly, understanding something profound. She hadn't saved him by standing in front of a bullet. She had saved him by staying when leaving would have been easier. Days later, Minute J made his final move. He transferred control, burned records, paid debts that could not be erased any other way. He didn't escape his past. He dismantled it piece by piece. The cost was enormous, but the reward was something no empire had ever given him. One evening, long after the house had settled into silence, Minute J found Jia on the terrace, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the city. You could still walk away, he said quietly. I'm not the man you were meant to marry. Jia smiled faintly. No, you're the man I chose. He took her hands, his voice unsteady. I don't know how to love without Faye. She squeezed his fingers. Then we'll learn slowly. For the first time, Minute J believed in a future that did not require blood. And Gi believed that love could be something built, patiently, bravely, after ruin. The house above the city no longer felt like a fortress. It breathed now. Morning light spilled freely through the glass walls, touching the floors without resistance, warming corners that had once existed only to hide secrets. Gi noticed it in small ways. The sound of Seoyun humming while brushing her teeth. The way Minute J lingered in doorways instead of scanning exits. The absence of men stationed at every shadowed angle. Peace did not arrive loudly. It arrived gently, as if unsure it was welcome. Gia stood in the kitchen, slicing fruit, when she felt Minute J behind her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence had changed, no longer a warning, no longer a shield. Just there. Seoyun wants you, he said quietly. She's made something. Gia smiled and followed him to the living room. Seoyun stood proudly beside the coffee table, where a small handmade card lay open. Crayon drawings filled the pages, 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright, oversized sun. At the top, written in careful, uneven letters, were the words, "My family." Gah's throat tightened. "This is you," Seoyun said, pointing. "And this is Appa. And this is me." Gia knelt. "It's beautiful." Seoyun hesitated, then added softly, "Will you stay forever?" The question was simple, innocent, and heavier than any threat Gia had faced. She looked up at Minute J. He was watching her, not with expectation, not with fear, but with openness. Whatever she chose, he would accept it. Gia turned back to Seoyun and took her small hands in her own. "Yes," she said, "if you'll have me." Seoyun threw her arms around her neck, laughing. "Then I don't have to wish anymore." Minute J closed his eyes. Later that night, when Seoyun was asleep, Gia stood on the terrace again, the city stretching endlessly below. She had stood here once before, unsure of everything. Now, she felt steady. Minute J joined her, the cool night air brushing against them both. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said. She turned to him. "You sound nervous." "I am," he admitted. "That's new." He took a breath, then another, as if preparing to speak a language he was only just learning. "I was raised to believe love was a weakness," he said. "Something that could be taken, used, destroyed." Gia listened without interrupting. "When my wife died," he continued, voice low, "I buried everything that felt. I thought survival meant emptiness." He turned to her fully now. "Then you walked into my life wearing a ruined wedding dress, and you stayed." Gah's eyes burned. "You didn't ask me to be better," he said. "You simply believed I could be." He reached into his pocket, not with sudden drama, not with rehearsed certainty, but with quiet resolve. He held out a ring. Simple, elegant, chosen with care. "I can't promise you a perfect life," he said, "but I can promise you honesty, safety, and a love that will never leave you alone again." Gah's voice trembled. "Minute J, marry me," he said softly. "Not because you were abandoned, not because my daughter needed you, but because I choose you, and I will keep choosing you." Tears slipped free, warm against her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "I choose you too." He pulled her into his arms then, not fiercely, not desperately, but with a certainty that felt unbreakable. The city watched silently as 2 broken lives aligned into something whole. Epilogue. The wedding was small. No cameras, no spectacle, no ghosts of expectations past. Seoyun walked between them, scattering petals with solemn importance. Gia wore a simple dress, sunlight woven into every step she took. Minute J stood waiting, not guarded, not surrounded by power, but open. When Gia reached him, he smiled without restraint. Later, as laughter filled the garden and Seoyun fell asleep in Gah's arms, Minute J watched them both with a peace he had never earned through fear or force. Gia had lost a wedding once, but she had gained a life. A family. A love that didn't arrive on time, but arrived true. And sometimes, she realized, that made all the difference. Thank you for listening to An Abandoned Bride is hugged by a little girl who whispers, "Be my mom." Her Korean mafia boss father agrees. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world. Until next time, Red Heart Hash.